when they do their quality of earnings. And what I mean by that is the financial part of a quality of earnings is somewhat similar deal to deal. The data inputs vary. The work you have to do to get them into a standard format varies, but the output is pretty consistent. If you look at 100 reputable firms' quality of earnings, yeah, we'll structure stuff differently, different levels of depth in the analysis, right? But they look similar.
There's an entire generation of Americans who no longer care about prestige, titles, work travel, fancy offices, and lunches. Welcome to Mundane Millionaires, a podcast for this generation of small business owners who want to set their ego aside and focus on what matters: family, community, quality of life, and cash flows. In each episode, Eric Pacifici and Kevin Henderson uncover what it takes to get a little money in the bank, control your time, and invest in building great families and lives. Let's get started.
All right, Eric, we're back with another conversation with Elliot Holland of Guardian Due Diligence. What'd you think, man?
Kev, it's good to see you. So I love Elliot. I've known Elliot. We're going to start our firm. One of the first people I reached out to was Elliot because I really admired what he was doing in the space. Totally. And since, getting in the trenches in these deals, I admire what he does even more because, having a high quality financial professional supporting your transaction is so important, particularly right now. And we lead off right off the bat with, the hot topic of the hour. Are people buying businesses that they shouldn't be? Is the economy? What are you seeing? He's in the weeds, and I love people who are in the weeds with financials like this, whether it's the lenders or the QOE providers. They have fantastic perspectives. Anything that jumped out at you in the interview?
Great anecdotes. My mind is still reeling from his comment that over the last year, up to 40+% of deals he's looked at, from his perspective, just absolute blatant fraud in the finance.
Fraud. And I push him on that because I'm like, do you mean fraud? You mean messy financials?
Yeah.
He's like, no.
It's almost unbelievable.
No. He's like, that is a high number, Kevin. That is a high. That should give every searcher pause to say, I need to be very careful that I don't, as Elliot says, end up in the poorhouse by buying one of these fraudulent deals.
And it's worth, as we're talking about this again, we mentioned a few times during the episode of this sounds like a commercial. And on the one hand, I feel bad. That the other hand, I don't, because we believe so strongly in financial diligence. But just straight disclaimer, Eric and I have no financial interest in Guardian Due Diligence and Elliott's business. Nothing. We don't get kickbacks. I mean, this isn't a commercial. It's just, the product is so important for families who are leveraging literally their entire financial future on a transaction like this. It's so important to get this right. And hearing that statistic, like I said, I'm still reeling. I'll be thinking about it all weekend because that's just mind blowing.
Well, I tell all my clients this as I'm making these recommendations because I want them to know that I'm not making these recommendations because there's anything in it for me. In fact, legal ethics say that we have to do what's in the best interest of our clients. And what's in the best interest of a business buyer is to go find high quality service providers. Even if you're the most sophisticated financial mind that exists, don't burden it with having to do a proof of cash when you've got a lender to worry about and your family to worry about and a job to worry about and legal to worry about and the seller to worry about. It's too much. Go find the right person. And Elliot really talked. And I think people will enjoy also, just as a starting point, like what is quality of earnings? We get into that and really drill down. And so I enjoyed the interview. I knew I would. Elliot's fantastic. You're okay as well, Kevin. So
as usual, subpar performance from my co-host Eric, but just absolute dynamite performance from our guest Elliot.
Someone's got to hold this thing together, Kev. So I
think you're going to love this episode. So enjoy our conversation with Elliot, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Elliot Holland, welcome to the pod, Mundane Millionaires. Great to have you on the show and always good to see you.
What's up, fellas? What's going on?
Oh, living the dream, as they say, Elliot. It's going to become
I see the dream behind you, Kevin.
Kevin doesn't goof around. Kevin drinks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I want the ethics. This is me dog whistling to the bar.
It's been tough because I'm doing this big trek here in a couple of weeks, so I've been trying not to drink in September. Normally I'd be drinking on this recording, but anyway, we'll stick with water.
Elliot, excited to have you on the pod. I want to get right after it with, I think, the topic of the hour, which is we got a lot of people out there right now that are saying that Main Street is on the verge of a bust, that we're looking at staring down the barrel of a recession. We're sitting on the edge of chaos, whatever. You know, I went to a business buying boot camp yesterday, and the question I asked Twitter was, what do you want to tell the buyers? And a few wise guys said, tell them to build a business, don't buy one, because we've got problems on the horizon. You're in the weeds with these deals. You look at financial statements all day long. You look at these businesses inside and out. What's your perspective? Do you really believe that we're at a precipice where we're looking at difficulty in small business?
So I don't think anybody should stop looking to buy a business. I still think fundamentally it's the best way to generate wealth. It's hard though. I would say that a year ago, and I got kind of beat up on Twitter, we had like 12 years of an up market, right? Leading into 2023. And one of my first tweets in 2023 is like, this is going to be a falling knife year. Everybody's yelling and screaming. I'm lying. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm the idiot. Cool. What did we see? We saw softenings. We saw people having to work harder. We saw those notes, the interest going up. We saw people that got into things that were difficult. We got some folks that I think are coming back saying, oh, don't do it. But like starting a business is so different than buying one. I think that feedback is trash, honestly.
I wish listeners could have seen your face when Eric said that, because your face was broadcasting as Eric was talking what you thought of that. Why in this environment do you still think that's true? I'm curious.
Why do I think it's still trouble?
Yeah, like can startup be a hedge against some of these, rising interest rate?
Man, like here's the thing, dude. So like startups. So I'm going to start an HVAC company, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go buy some trucks, start doing one house, then two houses, then four, then eight. Who am I feeding? Whose wife is saying, hey, quit that $150,000 job to go put roof? And then when you start, you roofing, bro. You're in the truck, the white truck. That's all they drive. Like, are you really talking about that? You know what I mean? Like, okay, now a plumbing company. Like, do you know how to fix the back of a toilet? Do you fix your own toilet? So like, I think people say the thing I'm doing is hard, go do the other thing. Nah, man, all this startups are hard. Buying a business running is hard. Now, what I think we've done in SMB and done a good job is we have numerically, with a lot of evidence points, said that buying is better than building, right? I don't think that changes just because the market's down 10%. What I will say is I think people are still coming in with those wild 2021, 2022 multiples and those skinny 10% seller notes. I mean, I think that trash has to go out the window.
So you're
but that's going to force buyers to be stronger negotiators.
Are you talking about 5X? Like what multiple specifically are you seeing?
Crazy ones, honestly. I'm seeing a lot of sixes. A lot of fives on like $400,000 of SDE, like not even EBITDA.
When you say seeing, you're saying that people are coming to you as a quality of earnings provider with a deal they're thinking about buying at these multiples, and you're scratching your head wondering how on earth are you making a 6X multiple work in a 2023 environment the same way it did in a 2021?
Well, all right, I'm going to go off topic and bring it back. So I used to be in private equity. I used to be a deal guy. I used to be in the shoes of my clients. So I think it's unfair to say that I'm scratching my head like you're crazy because the market sets the price. If I want Bob's roofing, company in Oklahoma, and that crazy dude wants 6X, my choice is to get that deal or not. And a lot of folks are sort of, if I live in Oklahoma and I don't want to leave and everything else I've seen is 10 hours away, I get it. But I don't think that we've pushed hard or people have talked about larger seller notes. Like SBA kind of set the market at 10. I think 20 and 30 were marketplace norms 5 or 6 years ago. I also think that we're letting people add way too much BS back to SDE to then get a multiple that's too high. And I think the market hasn't sizzled down, but I also think buyers, especially first-time buyers, don't know how to push.
Is this reflective of Is this different? So you've been doing quality of earnings. You started Guardian in 2020, which obviously dramatically different environment. We had COVID and all that, but then we come out of that and, valuations are. Is what you're seeing different today than what you were seeing in 2020?
Oh yeah. 2020 was the whole market screwed and the government saving everybody. Right? I mean,
Sure.
it was bad. We were home, couldn't leave, but we're getting checks.
But I mean, forget about COVID. I mean, like, when things were better versus now when things are supposedly, overheated and on the way down.
Look, when the market's been going up for 12 years, it's hard for anyone who's not a prudent investor to think anything besides it going up is going to happen. So the 6Xs, the 5Xs, the 30-day and the seller's gone, like the very seller-friendly terms were flying in 2020 and 2021, even in 2022. Now, I will say this, 85% of my book of business are first-time buyers. So my data is skewed towards that. Now what I'm seeing is people sort of having a hard time getting their debt service coverage ratio to work inside of a transaction at 5 and 6X, but they're trying to figure out how to get the seller's price on the LOI. I haven't seen folks do a great job of push a little bit and get a deal that they actually want to do. I've seen a lot of folks, I think, that are at the very, very, very edge of like every constraint in their system when they purchase.
When you see someone, I'm just trying to think. So how does someone get to that point better prepared? I guess I'm struggling with the way to ask the question, but what's the difference that you see when searchers are coming and talking to you and you're like, okay, this person gets it. This person understands, they're approaching their modeling differently versus this other person where you're like, okay, we got to take a step back and really walk through methodically to help lead the horse to water, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's practice. And I think you can get practice without a whole bunch of years. But I'll say this. You go to SMB and you talk to like a Reg Zeller or a John Wilson or one of these guys that have negotiated several deals, and they will call BS on stuff and just say, I ain't doing it.
Yeah.
You guys can go ahead and do it. I ain't doing it. I have rules, restrictions. It's cute, lovely business. I'm out, right? And when they negotiate, they're not trying to make sure the seller's whole, or they're not even listening to the broker. Like they've been around this enough to know that they're the money bags and what they say is goes and deals that they want to get done. Whereas the 35 people that have not consummated a deal and probably are like their first or second LOI, the questions that they ask are like, well, it's $1 million of SDE, but only $400,000 of EBITDA. And they want, 8 times the SDE. And I'm trying to get a seller note or an earn out to get there. No, dude, it's not worth that. And so I think if you put it on the edges, it's the practice. And so I think people should play their first LOI sooner. One of my famous sayings is send the darn LOI. And you should practice on each one as if you were just getting ready for the main event, as opposed to haphazardly doing the first one and not getting all the lessons.
It's interesting you say that, because I just recently returned from Holdco conference and had a conversation with someone who walked away from a deal while at the conference over largely exactly what you're talking to. This was a person that does a lot of, has a lot of reps, really experienced. The seller came back with a crazy ask of kind of, I know what this is worth to you as the buyer, so I want more money. And he was kind of like, pound sand onto the next one. And I think there's a lot to be said there. The natural pushback we always get on this line of discussion, though, and I'll leave it to you to intuit who pushes back on this, but that's always like, this concept of getting reps, don't put in the LOI unless you're like absolutely committed to closing that deal.
That ain't the game. That ain't the game we playing. We're not playing a get nice game. We're playing a get rich game. So Reg, why I love guys like him, he's like, I'm getting rich. And if you don't like the way I'm doing it, that's okay. And that's not, he's a great guy. He's not a mean fellow. It's just my strategy is my strategy. I'm going with it. So that's how an experienced buyer.
Have you spent time around him, Elliot? I don't shout out to Reg if he's listening.
I think Reg called you out at Holdco conference that you aren't spending time with him, Eric. You keep not going to the events he's at.
Maybe there's a reason for that, Kevin. I don't know. We'll talk about it when we have him on the pod, but I'm kidding.
But it's a great point, Elliot, and I tend to agree with you. I was curious your feedback, and I love the way you put it.
This
I mean,
ain't a nice
that's not the
thing.
game. It's just not.
And here's the thing. So in no other world would this person that we're talking about have as loud a voice as they do. It's only because it's SMB Twitter, right? Need to buy companies at reasonable multiples to get maximum ROI, and whatever they have to do that is what they have to do. And unfortunately, we are not going to sit here and lie and act like you put 100 brokers in a room and 100 are telling the truth 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. So how in a system where people are misstating truths am I supposed to be the only honest Johnny making sure I'm doing right by everybody else? No, that's not the game. That ain't the game.
Elliot, let's talk about your story. Let's talk about your story, because you have an interesting background. You're not, I don't want to tell it. You could tell yourself, but HBS, you searched, you started Guardian. Tell us about your search process, because ultimately you didn't end up acquiring. Tell us what you're trying to buy and what happened.
So the quick background: undergrad engineer, HBS, got into private equity, like the former Wall Street stuff. Realized private equity is really about owning equity, not working for folks that represent equity of trust funds and pensions. And so I rolled out with a mentor of mine, and we were independent sponsors, which are just searchers with MBAs or past deal experience, in my opinion. So with my business partner, I did 3 deals: a trucking company, automotive parts business, and a clinical trials business. And then I spun out when he effectively retired, and I took a run at several companies. The one that I ran at probably most heavily was a durable medical equipment company in Arkansas. And one of my equity guys, mentors, who I didn't know had perverse incentives, blew the deal up. And I was overextended, like big broke. So I was driving my Land Rover truck through Atlanta, driving for Uber, trying to pay the rent. I was that overextended. And so I took a look at the marketplace, and I knew how difficult it was when I was doing deals to find good quality of earnings providers for smaller deals. Smaller deals are different because the human element of the seller is such a bigger component, and recognizing that they're typically underdeveloped in the financial department. So sending these 100-point lists that, yeah, you should be able to know as a buyer, but like, you're putting everybody to sleep, bro. Those quality of earnings providers were pervasively messing up deals. And I said, there's room for a better quality of earnings provider here that has deal experience that can help not only on sort of the basic financial due diligence, but also as all these new entrants to the market come and these first-time buyers show up who don't have the negotiation experience from my past, how are they going to succeed on their first or second or third LOI? They're going to need somebody like me to help them understand what's crazy, what's inbounds, and what's on the line. You got to make a judgment call. And so Guardian was formed to be the quality of earnings firm I wish I had when I was searching. And as we expand our services, we're trying to figure out more and create more creative ways to serve searchers. That's our main customer type.
So I want to push on that a little bit to understand and love that origin story. It sounds very familiar, Elliot, which we've talked about openly here on Twitter elsewhere. But I'm curious, so get a little more specific. What was it in the QOE world that you were seeing, put aside some of the simple stuff like, tone deaf, 100-point, diligence checklist. And I don't want to minimize, that can really set the diligence process off on the wrong foot. But like, what else? What specifically were you looking at thinking, man, some of the QOE products out there, they aren't getting it, or at least aren't getting it for this category of business buyer, right? Maybe they're private equity shops, they're overthinking, they're too wonky. Like what specifically were you seeing and saying to yourself, man, I can do A, B, and C and provide a way better product and solution for my clients?
Yeah. So there's 3 main ways that I thought QOE providers for small deals sucked. The first way was that a person will say, hey, I'm buying a deal. I want a somewhat branded QOE. So I want like a top 100 CPA firm. I want the firm the private equity guys go to. So the guy who sells you is the same guy that sold the private equity firm down the street, but you don't get the A players on your deal. You get the dudes fresh out of accounting school, right? That are making their bones on your $1 million bet.
Yeah. And
screwing a lot of stuff up and having to correct it, and the timeline's blown. And so you get the C players at the big shops. That was one suck. The other suck was a $2 million deal is like doing a deal at the family reunion, right? No, it's real human to human. It's like I'm buying Joe's business that he built for 20 years in his hometown. You know, he sponsors all the sports in that town. He's put kids through college. His CPA, his controller is some dude from high school that knew how to count really well and just he trusted with his money. And his lawyer is probably some hometown dude that this might be his third transaction. And so when you bring like a audit-centric QOE firm into that environment, it's like bringing Wall Street to the family reunion. It's like oil and water. And when you're trying to get a QOE done in 4 weeks or get a deal done in 90 days and your QOE firm causes tension in your deal, not you as a buyer, your QOE firm, which I've seen happen, you just paid for a problem. That's the second suck. The third suck was in small deals, you ain't gonna get all electronic documents.
Right.
Ain't gonna happen, Captain. So a lot of these firms, as soon as they get their first PDF or their first data set that's not exactly in the format that they want it to be, they effectively throw their hands up. They just ask so many questions that they can't go forward. And so now you're like 3 weeks into a 4-week QOE, 45 days into a 90-day close, and your quality of earnings firm is saying, well, the working capital is not truly on accrual basis, and the adjustments they sent aren't really accrual, and I don't know how to correct it in the quality of earnings, and I don't want to put my name on something that goes to a lender. It's not perfect. And so now their need for perfection slows your deal down and causes tension. So those are the three I thought QA providers for small deals suck.
So how are you solving that though? Because, and forgive my ignorance on financial diligence, but at a certain level, there are some things like you just really can't do your job without. And I see this happen back to your point number 2, where it's, you know, really friendly. The seller's never sold a business before though. You know, it's like the family reunion. And then all of a sudden they're being asked for, we want your QBO file. We want bank statements. We want tax returns back several years. And they're like, why the hell am I giving you this? Right. At the end of the day, at some point you can't do an effective QOE if you don't have the general ledger.
Thank you for the bounce pass, Kevin. Thank you for the bounce pass, brother.
That's what I'm here for. Layups, buddy.
Hey man, CP3. I love it. So I use the example all the time of a fixed asset list, right? So 10 trucks, hauling up the East Coast, and you got your QOE list, right? And they're like, fixed asset list. I don't have a fixed asset list.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't it in your taxes? Yeah, but that's for depreciation purposes. It's not really true. There's no market values on it. Don't you guys have an asset list that you keep? No, we don't have it. So that's something that you couldn't close the deal without. But come on, guys, this ain't hard. Somebody knows if one of those 10 trucks walks off that yard that somebody stole it. And I asked that question on calls. I'm like, so if I walked on your yard and stole one of your trucks, nobody would know. Oh no, man, somebody would know. Johnny, he's out there in the lot all the time. No way it would happen to John. Johnny got the list.
Perfect. Get me Johnny. Yeah. Okay.
All these things that we love in a perfect area and perfect data sets are available in some abstract form if you just think mentally about what it is. I think the separation of like the business versus the numbers gets us in trouble. I mean, I've done deals on companies that didn't have financial systems, guys. Like there's a way to get the data into the best form so somebody can make a decision. And, you know, we can't do everything, right? But I've sat next to people. I've been called when an ABC firm won't make an assumption or do the work to go get a data piece. And now to close the deal, buyer X has got to come to have me finish their QOE. And it's like, really? Like all that complexity for a piece of data? And then for small businesses like mine, we don't have C players. I can't sell QOEs to these very specific, spending their own money folks with C players. Like you got to bring A game every single day. And then the thing about handling people in the right way is if you come off as an auditor, you're going to get the treatment the auditors get when people are sending data. Yeah. Versus if you're like, hey, I got this thing I got to do before you get your $7 million check. I'll be as nice as I can. The quicker we can do it, the better. It just lays a foundation for ease that I think I've seen people's shoulders drop on like video calls. And I'm like, hey, I got this thing I do all the time. I got to do it here. I'm not here to blow up deals. Nobody would hire me if that was what I did. If you just give me the data and make it efficient, I'll stay out of your way and I'll be done in 4 to 6 weeks. Shoulders just drop.
My doctor said just basically the same thing right before I got my last colonoscopy. So that sounds very familiar to me, but that's a joke.
Eric,
So,
I need to remind you again, this is a family show.
Family show. Gosh, I do that every time. But Ellie, let's pause for a second and tell us what is quality of earnings. Why I'm buying a business, like, why don't I just look at the books myself? What do you do?
Sure. If you speak accounting, as good as a CPA, you should look at them yourself. So I tell people that too. I think people say look at it themselves. It's like looking at something in Japanese. You can look at it. What are you going to figure out about it? You know, on your biggest bet of your life, probably by 10x, right? $1 million first with guarantee, and you're going to look at it in a language you don't speak. So what is the quality of earnings? Small businesses have unaudited financials with huge volatilities. And when sellers know they're getting 4 to 7 to 8 times SDE, it's probably the biggest time in their life where the incentive is the largest to tell a story, is what I'll say, since we're a family show. And if they sell you the stories like the used car lot, there's no take backs.
Yeah.
So how do you take volatile small business financials? I'm underinvested in financial stacks. That controller went to high school with the owner that counts good, but that's about it. You know what I mean? The CPA that gets paid $1,500 to do the taxes, but you're trying to treat him like he's in the books once a month. How do you get that into a format where equity investors can make a decision? You know, sometimes banks can make a decision. So the quality of earnings is an audit-like tool made for small deals where instead of focusing on every single thing in the world like an audit does, you're focused on understanding cash flow for the particular period so that somebody can say, okay, broker said SD is 900, SD is really 750. And now that we know what it is, we can actually make decisions as lenders, as equity, as the buyer on what to do. You know what's actually there.
Well, I was going to say that sounds fairly straightforward. And I promise for listeners, I'm not purposely making this into a sales pitch. I'm genuinely curious because you offer different tiers, right, through Guardian of quality of earnings review. So that description sounds very succinct, very simple, but it sounds kind of like one size fits all on these smaller deals. So where do things then vary in quality of earnings? And if I'm a buyer, how am I thinking about what type of review am I doing? What are we really looking at? You know, are there things beyond proof of cash that for certain businesses, for example, if I'm looking at retail, I really also need to be thinking about X from a financial diligence standpoint?
So I recently sent an email that said that most people are shooting 2 air balls when they do their quality of earnings. And what I mean by that is the financial part of a quality of earnings is somewhat similar deal to deal. The data inputs vary. The work you have to do to get them into a standard format varies, but the output is pretty consistent. If you look at 100 reputable firms' quality of earnings, yeah, we'll structure stuff differently, different levels of depth in the analysis, right? But they look similar. Here's the difference. In small businesses, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million, retail, you got to look at leases for the rent. Is the main tenant leaving, leave the whole thing hanging? What's their point of sale system? So these are outside of the realm of a normal QOE, but is that included or not? You know, in a company that takes deposits, right? So I was working on a company where every quarter they take deposits for the rest of the quarter to do work. So that creates complexity in balance sheet accounts that you actually really need to reconcile, not just at the end of the quality of earnings period, but at the end of close, so that you don't get a business where all the cash was sucked out of it and you don't have any deposits coming and your working capital is crazy. And because you haven't been sitting in the business, you probably don't speak working capital, you wouldn't know what to do. Or like a lot of online businesses, you need to do the proof of cash and the financial analysis. But if you're not looking at the Amazon stuff, if you're not looking at the point of sale, if you're not looking at Stripe, if you're not looking at the digital marketing analytics, you actually missed the boat. And so part of the provider that you choose is, do they actually know what you need to look at to get comfortable? Otherwise, most people are going to minimize the amount of work that they're going to do for what you pay them.
Right. It's a great point. And I love the way you said that, because I feel like a lot of people view the QOE product and process as really a retrospective, just kind of historical audit, for lack of a better word. And without fully appreciating how important it is prospectively as well, because it, like you said, I mean, you can buy a business without having gone through a robust quality of earnings review and really understanding what's truly happening in the business versus what's being told to you in the sim, in order to start on that right foot. Because the worst possible case you can end up with, absent fraud, is to close a business and 3 weeks later realize, oh shit, I don't have enough cash to make payroll. Right.
Yeah, or
I feel like that's an underappreciated aspect, is sort of how QOE helps business owners on day 1 through day 60 really kind of level set and be set up for success going forward.
There was a recent podcast that talked about a deal that we now know has the person had to shut it down, and it was so bad that they left the person anonymous. Right, that person decided to look at the numbers themselves. Right, and they worked at a job where they had some financial capacity, and if you listen to it as a diligence provider, you'll hear about 17 or 18 misses that she shared.
Well, we saw it as a legal provider, and we were seeing the same. I mean, from consulting services to, giving away the retention bonuses, and it's easy to pick on that person. I get in hindsight, and obviously we got a canned version of it. Seeing the day to day is a little bit.
But I don't want to pick. I actually think that was the bravest thing anybody's done this year.
Totally.
But I think we'd be fools not to learn. I would high five that person if I saw him, because they said, hey, look, this is how you can get screwed. And I'm uncomfortably willing to put myself out there. And some people have gone at her. And I think that's unfair. If somebody is bold enough to be vulnerable in that way, I'm about to lose $1 million. I think they should be respected, hard stop. But I think the lesson there is, you don't want to be the one counting numbers on your biggest bet, and you don't do that every day. Like, I wouldn't write. I know my way around a legal document.
But Elliot, that's why you said earlier, if you know accounting, feel free, do it yourself. I disagree with that. I fundamentally disagree with that. And the biggest issues we've had in transactions with really sophisticated buyers that can do a proof of cash or quality of earnings all day is, again, the context, right? The experience. Not, a lot of them are coming from investment banking or coming off Wall Street. It's different. And then two, the overconfidence, right? So, I'm overly confident. I'm, you're likely to make mistakes. But the biggest thing is, these transactions move so incredibly fast. There's so much going on. In addition to the fact that you probably have a family, you got kids, you're trying to manage legal, you're trying to manage the relationship with the seller. You want that relationship to be as good as possible. And yet you're the person paying them for, the QuickBooks Online files. It doesn't work. And I have concrete examples of people who have deals that frankly should have died earlier, right? They should have died earlier, because they should have hired a quality of earnings provider. They would have found it early on in the process, or we would have figured it out and the seller and them would have worked through it. But instead they held on for months, and then we're having a knockdown, drag out fight at the 3-yard line over pretty rudimentary. And these are like, I'm not kidding, as sophisticated.
So can I change my answer?
And on top of that,
I'm not. This is go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just gonna say, on top of that, like, I don't care what level of MBA you are and how much experience, like deal savvy experience you have in private equity or whatever. Like, nobody goes through this process without emotional ties to their deal. Yeah. And like, if you go in thinking, well, no, I'm rational, I worked at a PE shop, I've looked at 100 deals, I've got a Wharton MBA, like, I can step back and look at that. No, you can't. I mean, you just can't when you're.
Well, the funny part is they did it in their previous lives. So what the hell makes them think they can do it here?
Totally.
I don't sell uphill on QOE, Eric. So like, when you asked me earlier who should get one, I kind of did the thing. I don't want to argue with the customer. If somebody thinks that they can do it, then go do it. Have fun. I'm not going to sell uphill, because it doesn't make any sense for me. But what I will say is 25% of my book of business are private equity, investment bankers, accountants who know they're not objective. You're going from a 6-figure salary to a 7-figure opportunity, right? And it all looks glossy in the broker's sim. and it's changing your life, and you're thinking about different private schools and that private jet 5 years, and you want to be the objective person to say, hey, the numbers ain't right. And most of my clients have families, kids. You got to deal with SMB law and the legal. You got to deal with somebody in the insurance. You got to go understand this industry. You got to ask these like bespoke questions on Twitter, hoping you're going to get an answer. You got to sit down at night and be like, butt clenching, like, am I really going to put $1 million on the line for this? And you want to be doing the QOE. And then the thing is, so much of small business financials are that they're not stated correctly. So now you're going to tell me you maximize the analysis of some financials that weren't stated correctly? Good effing luck.
Yeah. I mean, well, and two, I mean, the objectivity of I am 6 months into this, probably from the time I started diligencing it to getting under LOI.
Yep.
Now I've been at this for 3 months. And then I discover that they have, 2 weeks before closing, I discovered that they haven't been crediting inventory off of cost of goods sold. And it's now a valuation. And I'm in the deal for $75K between, the lender and various things, and also my time and the kids. I've been telling the kids we're moving from, Atlanta, Georgia to Denver, Colorado, and we're looking at schools, we're looking at rental houses, and I'm supposed to make a sound judgment call. I mean, Colorado, and we're looking at schools, we're looking at rental houses, and I'm supposed to make a sound judgment call. I mean, I had a buyer.
On stuff that sometimes can show up as like bank statements don't match the balance sheet by 5%, but that little shift, if you just say, oh, I'm just going to fix it, you don't realize that implies the whole financial system is off, and it could be completely different. And then folks doing these $100,000, $300,000, $400,000 SDE deals, you make a $200,000 SDE mistake, you go into the poor house. Yeah. There's not enough juice in there for you to recover.
I'm going to steal Eric's comment that I've heard him make repeatedly, and I don't want to belabor this topic too much, but I love the way he puts it. And that's, if like shit hits the fan and this deal tanks, like I have to be able to look my spouse in the eye and say, when my house is being repossessed, I did literally everything I could. Like this was out and out fraud. Like there was nothing I could have done. I don't want to be in the position where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm not an accountant. I thought I was savvy enough. And I totally missed this.
I saved $10,000 on my QOE. They did the bare minimum for what they were paid. I took it and was so happy that they just validated my I'm in love with the deal decision. And now I'm ruined, and everybody else in the transaction got paid. Yeah, when I'm looking kids and wives in the house, and now we got to go pay off this debt by us working harder. We bought a crater, and you were trying to save 10 grand on $1 million bet. Like seriously?
And this is going to sound like a sales pitch for QOE, but it's because it is, right? Like, no, I tell, this is what I tell everyone. Listen, this is too important of a decision.
Yeah.
And I've had some bad things happen to me in life. I've had setbacks. I've made mistakes. Not everything has gone perfectly. The times with which I've done everything I could have conceivably done to get it right, and it didn't work out. You know what? I've always found the silver lining. I've been comfortable with it. It's the times that I didn't. And there's those little things, those little breadcrumbs that I'm thinking about late at night where I'm going, like, if I had just done X, Y, and Z, and I'm kicking myself and I'm thinking about my kids, and I'm just like, it's not worth it to cut corners when this is not. I mean, people talk about buying a home as being their largest lifetime transaction. This is that times 10. This is not buying a business. This is buying a new life.
So you know less about it. It's a 10X bet, and you're being cheap on the analysis. You wouldn't buy a house without a house inspector. You wouldn't buy a car without a mechanic, but you're going to buy a $1 million business, and you're just going to flip through the damn financials like, I think they're solid.
Well, and Elliot, so the thing is too, is in every deal that I have right now, and I literally mean every deal, when they go do quality of earnings in this environment, there's a renegotiation at the end of this quality of earnings every time, because that marketed SDE or EBITDA is never the actual. There's always something, and so
there's always something.
If you're skipping that step, you're number one, you're missing out on the value, but two, you're not getting to the bottom of the actual cash. You're going to need $1 of EBITDA is $3.50 to $5 of value. That's right. Huge. If there's even an add back that's wrong, even a singular add back, your quality.
And then let me add something else. So a lot of us are in our 30s or 40s, right? And we talk about these unsophisticated sellers. They don't know squat. They didn't go to a fancy MBA school. These sellers be running games around people all the time.
Yeah.
I'm stupiding you into a $5 million transaction that should have been $1 million. And then all of a sudden, who's the smart one? That Wharton kid, right? Or the 60-year-old that sold his business for like 8 times what the actual EBITDA was because he was able to float some BS through his financials using his accountant, who you thought was going to be more interested in being honest than being a client service provider or maybe in on the deal himself, their salesperson or whatever. These people have, it's $1 EBITDA is $4 in my pocket as a seller. Man, I really should tell the truth, but if I'm on the flex, I might lie. And then what? Because you're saying everything should be smaller for a smaller deal, but for the size of the bet the person's making, it is the kind of bet that either exponentially grows you or, like, let's be honest, a lot of the people where these deals go bad, we never hear from them again.
Well, there's
right. They're just off the market. Well, that's what I'm saying.
I always say these sellers, Elliot, the way I would characterize it is they're dumb like a fox. They're dumb like a fox. They're not as clever as they think they are, but they're always trying to pull something with the working capital. I'm serious. You get into the interim period, you sign the purchase agreement. They're supposed to deliver X amount of working capital. The one I keep seeing pop up is, hey, I've bought a whole bunch of inventory, a ton of inventory because it's helped me offset some tax. I got 4 years worth of inventory. I'm just going to give it to you. And I just, every time at the beginning of the deal, I tell the buyer, I'm like, they're not going to give you $5 million of inventory just out of the goodness of their heart. You're going to get deep into this deal and there's going to start being wonkiness and they're going to start trying to be dumb like a fox. And, you got to have somebody who's looked at it up front and you go back to them and go, hey, I didn't think about cost of goods sold. Did you look at that in the quality of earnings so we could do a bring down between where we were, where we are, make sense of this? Like that, those checks and balances, I think are critical. What is the softening percentage that you see, Elliot? Because I tell everybody that coming out of quality of earnings, I think it's 70 to 80% EBITDA. Well, if you've got a 750K EBITDA business or SDE business, that's 600 to 650 after the quality of earnings. Are you seeing the same thing? Like, what's your perspective?
I am, but even more important message, I think, is last year, about 80% of the deals came out of QOE in a place where even if they were off, like you said, Eric, there was a way to renegotiate it to still get a deal done. It wasn't like maliciously just totally off. This year, 40 to 50% of my deals have been completely fraudulent.
Completely fraudulent.
Completely fraudulent. I'm talking about people adding $1 million of deposits into a bank account, trying to claim it was customers that paid in cash, but there's no invoices.
Say that again for effect. How many?
$1 million worth of cash was deposited into a bank and credited as revenue.
No, what percentage is what?
Yeah, no, I mean the percentage.
40, about 40 to 45% of the deals this year have been like fraudulent.
That is mind blowing.
Now, I will say I am not the cheapest quality of earnings provider. So I think that there's some bias there. And I think people who have tough deals are more likely to come my way out of fairness, right? But there's probably been $50 million of purchase price that I've saved people from going to the poorhouse. Like, it was completely fraudulent. I had an accountant on a call after he tried to filibuster me and like outlast saying BS on phone calls. And finally he said, we understand GAAP, but we just don't adhere to it here at this company. It was like a $2.7 million EBITDA business that was really throwing off like 1.3.
Wow.
With an adjustment, when we knocked off the first $500,000 adjustment, these fools came with another $500,000 adjustment, calling it prepaids that they hadn't talked about before. I mean, this crazy stuff is happening.
So they threw,
and these are all people with great brand names on their firms. I had another company where the company was using a company that basically your customer pays this company because they're only going to pay that company in 30 days. You need the money now. It's like factoring. And the factoring company's information did not match the company's information. And on a low EBITDA or SDE business, it was like there were probably 4 or 5 things in the deal that were potential issues that would have been bigger than the whole of the EBITDA that was being purchased.
Wow.
Let's talk about this for a few more minutes because this is shocking to me. I tell everybody
Totally. I'm actually floored.
I tell every single buyer that your deal is going to die in one of two places. It's either going to die in the quality of earnings, or it's going to die at the 3-yard line. We don't really see the ones that die in quality of earnings, although we do have people come to us from time to time, so we don't have a ton of visibility to what's going on in there. Are there any themes in this? You call them fraudulent. I mean, fraudulent's a high bar. I mean, you're telling me that they are intentionally, nefariously trying to scam buyers. Is that what you're asserting?
Yes. And I'm saying it emphatically now. I've been in the closet with it historically because people like to argue. But let's just be honest. That owner that deposited $1 million into his bank account and tried to call it revenue with no invoices, what was he trying to do? It was a mistake?
Well, that's fraud. I mean, if you have, what's the technical term, Kevin, under the law? Scienter. It's the malicious intent to try to deceive somebody. That's fraud.
Yeah.
If you try to throw $2.7 million of EBITDA, that's really 1.3. And when the adjustments are kicked out by the quality of earnings provider, you try to make up for them by a fraudulent $500,000 of prepaid. What was that? A mistake?
Well, no, I agree. And I guess what I'm trying to drill down on is these sellers and their books on Main Street, they leave a lot to be desired. And so to me, there's a big distinction between I have bad bookkeeping practices and therefore my product when I market my business is, less than accurate.
It's different, Eric. But like sometimes these folks are lying. Here's the thing. So here's where I think it's different. Bad bookkeeper, not an accrual basis financials, maybe some inventory got expensed, maybe some family members took some stuff, maybe some vacations were off. Like I live in that every day. So all that messy marketplace stuff, all the stuff that's talked about around poor, I don't even want to say poor, just Main Street size accounting systems. Like I eat that for breakfast. What I'm saying is this year, I've seen more deals where I am 100% sure that the seller was trying to defraud somebody into paying a multiple on like $500,000 to $1 million of fraudulent bogus EBITDA. And they got all the stories and they got all the, well, this is what happened. And they got all the accountants who have CPA on them, but they can talk about a situation for hours and never say that this is fake. And if you're not persistent enough or you're not pushing hard enough, which I've seen a lot of people not do, you believe the story and keep going. And then people say, oh, well, the SBA they're only going to do it if it's a good deal. How are all these people talking about they lost all this money if the SBA catches these things? And so I think we have to be honest about there's messy books and then there's fraudulent activity attempting to put people in the poorhouse. And when markets get bad, what do you think happens? The honorable people even start telling the stories, right? Because they had their retirement set on selling a business at a certain price. They can't do it no more. So what are they doing? I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer because I still think buying companies is the right thing. I'm just saying, watch your behind. This isn't the time to be skinny on your diligence.
So aside from the obvious of, go hire a quality of earnings provider and a lawyer, like I'm a first time buyer. How do I make sure that I don't buy one of these businesses?
I wanted to ask this exact question.
I think you have to have some concept that you are no longer objective after that seller signs your LOI. I think is step one. You need to realize that you are more incented to go from typically 6-figure earnings to 7-figure ownership. And that's going to taint your lens. I think you also have to admit, where are you like top 10%? Like, are you a top 10% lawyer, a top 10% accountant, or a top 10% operations analyzer? If you're not kind of top 10% or top 25%, you probably want to get some help in the mission critical things for the business. Now, I'm not saying spend frivolously on everything. Maybe it's your cousin, right? Maybe it's somebody that you barter with on SMB Twitter. Maybe it's somebody you pay $10,000 for a trip to Vegas to check out that HVAC business down the street. I'm just saying, get some help. And then I also think you got to stop believing brokers and sellers just because they're old and they have brand names. You got to realize these jokers if they tell a story, you're going to pay 4 to 6 times that story. And you'll be talking to Lisa Forrest or Bruce Marks about what had happened was, and they're going to be like, yeah, and what's going to happen is terrible, right? There's no take back here. And so I think we listen to these folks. And here's the thing that's funny to me. So as a broker, I had this conversation a couple of days ago, and A broker is typically not a CPA, and they're definitely not a diligence provider, and their level of analysis is not that of QOE. So they'll be financial people, and you'll want to listen to them. But at the end of the day, they're taking the stuff that the seller did. They're knowing that higher EBITDA businesses are going to sell quicker at higher multiples. They get 10%, and they're pushing it out, looking real glossy, and we're believing some of this stuff. I think you got to be willing to spend the extra week kicking the tires, even if you have to miss a deadline with the seller. So Eric, I think one of the things that where the rubber really hits the road is you told the seller you're going to close in 90 days, and 75 days into your 90, so 15 days before close, you find something that could be fraudulent or off to the level of 50% of the deal. But to investigate it, you got to push the closing date, and you got to risk losing the deal exclusivity. And that's the time when men are made and women are made.
Yeah.
Do you have the stones to realize you can't bet $1 million just because you told somebody a deadline? Then now you have 50% of this value that you're supposed to be buying that's at risk. You need to go take the time to go check it out. And if you need to get some help, go get the help.
So I'm just thinking about the numbers, Elliot, and maybe you, like us, don't have a lot of visibility kind of post closing and ongoing operations, but I'd be curious your thoughts if you do have any data or anecdotes here, just by sheer numbers, if like what you're seeing in terms of like whether it's playing fast and loose, out and out fraud, whatever, versus like your default rates in SBA loans and these businesses like actually failing. There's a wide gap there, which would lead me to believe that there's probably a lot of deals where this is happening. It's not being uncovered until post closing, but due to the grit and determination and business savvy of the buyer, they get through. So it's not like they aren't harmed. They just haven't actually failed. Is that kind of?
I think the recourse of the SBA 7A loan is so great that's why the default rates are so low, because people have no choice but to fight through it. Even that person that closes the business and goes and gets a job at Google and pays that note because they don't want to go into bankruptcy, right? That shows up as a non-defaulted loan. And I know people are doing that. However, there's also, because people are going to tell me that I was like Debbie the Downer, there's also times when like 15% of that EBITDA, you should just know that there's going to be something funky nobody's going to catch, right? Yeah. And that's just the game that we play. I think where you have to be careful is like, if you miss a 40% thing, you could be fighting for your life 6 weeks in. Like a 15% thing, no big deal. But here's what I would say. If you don't talk accounting, if you don't speak that language, I would argue you don't know a 15% thing from a 40% thing. For instance, on that podcast that they talked about the deal falling apart, they mentioned a working capital thing was off. What they didn't mention is that working capital thing actually affected EBITDA dollar for dollar, so they overpaid at a 4x multiple on that working capital shift. I knew that as soon as I heard it. Just the way it was presented. But a lot of people wouldn't recognize that's just not a working capital thing. It's not like working capital coming from 500 to 300. That's $200,000 of EBITDA that wasn't there that you paid 4x multiple. $800,000 of value you overpaid.
Yeah, some people hear
everybody knows that.
Some people hear 200 and say, "Ooh, rough," but could have gotten through it without appreciating. No, that's $800,000. That's 800. That's way more rough. Yeah,
and that bank wants a payment on that 800. You can't tell them, "Oh, but it wasn't real, guys." You know?
Do you think people should be buying these businesses without a strong grasp of financial accounting, Elliot?
I don't think you need a strong grasp.
Quality of earnings is enough to make sure it's done right?
You know, it's funny in this world, man. So if I think about the typical SMB lifespan, let's call it 10 years, right? Let's call it 2 years searching, and like year one, you suck. Like first 6 months, you suck. You go take somebody's class, you get a little better, you get some reps, you get a little better. And sometimes between like 9 months and 18, you close on a deal. For the next 7 or 8 years, you're an operator or a wealth creator or asset manager, depending on if you're an owner operator or you're going to hire somebody to run your business or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're still trying to maximize operations for maximum cash flow. And then for like a year or two, you're trying to turn into a seller. So I don't think it's necessary for a person to be a perfect accountant or even a perfect lawyer for those 2 years that's something that they're going to need. I think you hire out for that, but you hire out in a place that you trust because the stakes are too high. You can't, it's very hard to operate yourself out of a 40% miss on diligence. So I would say the main skill that a searcher has to have is a growth mindset and willingness to hop in there, roll their sleeves up and get to work. So I think they should hire out for things like accounting and legal. Because you can't get, all of us have been doing this for 10, 15 years plus at the highest level. You're not getting this knowledge reading some books and some tweets in 6 months. Like the game that we have in our heads and the muscle memory.
Yeah.
I bet you guys can look through legal documents and say, hey, they're setting us up to do X. So we can't do Y today because it's going to set us up for X. You haven't heard them say it, but I promise you it's coming. Those kind of things, you hire the help. There's reputable companies out here with like stellar reputations. I'm not talking to you guys and you're saying, hey, you're stopping some work to do the podcast. You got more work to do after this. Like hire someone who you trust.
Yeah, I do. Eric just has pizza to eat after this.
That's it, man. It's Friday, baby. Pizza. I'm doing some balloon animals at a local kids event, so I gotta get going here in a minute. But no,
I was just gonna say. So you're right. So many listeners are gonna be like, my word, these guys, like the sky is falling.
No, but let me jump in, Kevin, because the upshot here, and this is the issue that I had. I go to this boot camp yesterday, and it's like, teach me about legal M&A, and you got 45 minutes to go. And what do I, in those 45 minutes, do I go into the weeds? Do I get into substance? Do I talk about how indemnity works? Do I talk about caps, baskets, deductibles? Do I try to teach you how to negotiate a rep? Or do I say, here is what the process is going to look like for hiring a lawyer. Here's when to bring us in. Here's how to find a good lawyer. Here's the how your lawyer as a service provider should think about process. Here's how your lawyer, the type of substance your lawyer should drive. Here's how much you should think about spending. And, I'm not going to teach you to be a lawyer in 45 minutes. And
so I'm going to take a shot at that, Eric, because I deal with this all the time. So I morphed over the years. I didn't get to this place right away. But like when somebody calls me, and you can schedule calls with me on my website, and like, hey man, like I'm pretty accounting savvy. I don't really know if I need a QOE. Like, can you kind of explain to me what it is and why I should pay for it? I say, hey man, if you're not sure you want a QOE, I think you should probably not do one because it's so obvious to my target customer that it doesn't make sense for me to try to explain something to you that's like kind of obvious. I have a lot of content on it, a lot of content on it. If you want to get it done, let's talk at that point. But it's like, I shouldn't have to sell you into like getting a home inspector or getting a used car checked out. Now, I also go into rooms sometimes and it's like, okay, like SMB, there's people who haven't closed, people who have, people who closed many times, people who are checking it out or about to go home. I'm very thoughtful about who am I speaking to your point, Aaron. To me, I'm speaking to the wise person that's on the fence about hiring a lawyer. Because some people we're going to hire you no matter what. And some people think they can do it themselves or their uncle's going to do it. I think when I speak, it's like, hey, here's the ways you can get in trouble. Here's a solution around finding people to help. Here's like the implications of being wrong. And I think you guys need to make smart decisions. I try my best not to ever try to sell uphill is what I call it. Like I try to affect the people who are listening because I've gotten into situations where I'm discussing something with a person who chose a year ago not to get a QOE. It's like, we're wasting both of our time. Like my value is talking to somebody who's on the fence.
No, well, it's on the fence. Yes. So for me, I spend a lot of time trying to illustrate the value, right? Because all they think about is the price and they go, I just need you to do a form. I need this real quick form. And you're talking about, there are levers that can be built into the legal documents that are multi-million-dollar levers. And if you got to pull one of those at some point in the future, all of a sudden the value that we provided significantly outweighed the price. And also, even if you don't have to pull the lever, knowing it's there will help you sleep at night. I would imagine it's probably similar for you. It's insurance. Yeah. And you have always said, Elliot, one of my favorite lines, which is, I don't know anybody who has $1 million to lose. I don't know anybody who has $1 million to lose, whether you're have 50 million or you got nothing. Nobody has $1 million to lose. You just got to do the right things. Check. And this is going to sound very salesy, and we may be biased. People are going to listen to this and go, you guys are biased. We are, but we've seen the inner workings of these deals over and over and over again. We've lived it out. We've watched good outcomes, bad outcomes, and it's just
No, I think you're right. But like, biased ain't lying. Yeah, we sell services. We've seen it nasty in small business and big business. We've seen people go to the poorhouse. We've seen documents where we wouldn't have caught that thing, that person would have been screwed. I've seen QOEs where if I didn't catch that thing, that person would have been screwed. That their $10,000, $25,000 saved them $5 million of a bad deal, right? So I'm not lying, even though I'm biased, right? And I think the thing about return on investment in this capacity is I think some people have come from the school of like, I want to do this cheap, or their capital capacity is low. And, you know, I got to the point too, where like there are lower cost providers out there. And when people call me like, why is your price where it is? And I'm like, hey, I'm actually glad there's providers out there that charge less, that fit your budget. I am an advocate for everybody to succeed. If you get stuck over there, come back here. I always want you to be able to come back. I don't want to create any tension, and selling to me creates tension. And I just hope that everybody makes the right decision. I think even my coming on here and talking about this is just saying, hey, look, understand the stakes, make a good decision. We're here if you need us, but if you think you can do it by yourself, you know, go ahead.
So
Kevin, I think
Elliot,
should we wrap? Kevin, we got 8 minutes left.
I was going to say, if we can, I want to take 2 minutes at the end. So I tweeted that we were recording a short while ago and said you got 30 minutes to get your questions in, and a few people submitted. I like 2 of them, so I want to get your feedback rapid fire here really quick.
All right, let's go.
We've spent a lot of time on The Sky is Falling. What is the best deal, to the extent you can share, that's ever come across your desk as a QOE provider that you looked at it and were like, man, I wish I was buying this business?
I helped a guy buy a tow truck company last year.
Tow truck company, really? In terms of like towing?
Oh, yeah.
Not supplying tow trucks, but towing company.
No, they actually tow cars. And those are businesses that are really just trucks. And a trucking company should have a 10% margin, right? Yeah. These businesses have 25 to 30% margins. They just print money. And I was trying my absolute best to get them to roll my QOE into equity. I had owned a part of a tow truck company in my earlier years, but I think that was the one where I was just like, strong EBITDA, no BS, clean financials, like good market, big city. Yeah, the guy's doing great.
So I think we shared that client, Elliot, and that was a great deal. But it's a great legal analog as well, because very litigious business. Talk about legal levers. You know, that there was they're trucks, right? And if my memory serves me, they wanted to sell the trucks as is, you know, which is a huge problem for a company that consists of nothing but trucks. Yeah, great deal. But it's funny to see your perspective versus the legal perspective. It's a great financial business, legal, you know. So anyways.
No, it's funny. I think I want to double click on that. I'm not going to take a long time. And that's honesty too. From a like deal QOE perspective, great. From a legal perspective, it might be complicated and or touchy. And that's the game too, guys, is that's why you need both, right?
Totally. Love it.
Yeah.
Final rapid fire question here, Elliot. Craziest ad back you've ever seen?
There's a brokerage firm that is notorious for adding everything back and waiting for the buyers to fight that every expense is real. They just start from all this shit's add back.
Interesting.
And I've seen 3 or 4 deals from the same firm the same way, where it's like all of the operating expenses are added back. You wouldn't incur any of them because of this story, that story, this special situation, that. And you just have to fight for each and every one. And every time I get it, my client's like, this shouldn't be this. And I'm like, yeah, but this is what this firm does. You just got to play the game knowing that's what they're looking for. So the craziest add back was they added every darn thing back.
was literally everything. I love that.
Thing.
I love that. Elliot, we always like to wrap up with our guests plugging what they're working on. Anything you want to shout out, newsletter, your business, where people can find you on social, feel free to plug away.
Yep. So King of QOE on Twitter. That's my most active social. My website, Guardian Due Diligence. If you type that in, and even if you misspell it, I think my SEO is to the point where you'll probably find me there. I'm in the process of building out some services that'll be adjacent to the QOE to kind of help people close deals. And there'll be a class coming soon. So stay tuned for that. And if you're on my channels or on my newsletter, you'll hear all about it.
Love it. Definitely subscribe to Elliot's newsletter at Guardian Due Diligence. He puts out super valuable content, war stories. It's a great newsletter. I look forward to getting it every time it drops in my inbox. Elliot, thanks a lot for joining us, man. Really great to talk to you. You're a great friend, great champion of what we're doing. Likewise, we love what you're doing at Guardian and what you're doing to help this community.
I'm so glad you guys had me. I had a good time, and it's fun working in this community with you guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Elliot. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mundane Millionaires. If you enjoyed what you heard in this episode, make sure to follow Mundane Millionaires wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.